Hey guys, tonight we wander into the soft silver haze of the Mississippi River in the 1800s, where the water laps quietly against wooden hulls and fog curls like slow smoke along the banks. You trudge carefully along the damp riverbanks, boots sinking slightly into the mud, as if the earth itself is trying to pull you down into the river's timeless rhythm. Steam rises from early paddle wheelers like the gentle exhale of some massive, sleepy dragon. And you probably won't survive this quiet immersion without surrendering to its hypnotic, mist-wrapped pull. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know what riverbanks you're imagining while listening. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step closer, letting your fingers trail along the cool, wet rope fences lining the dock. The fog swallows the horizon, and the silhouettes of moored steamers shift like drifting ghosts. You inhale the scent of brackish water mixed with coal smoke, that peculiar perfume of early industrial America brushing against the natural earthiness of the river. Historians still argue whether this early fog, thick and pervasive, actually disrupted shipping schedules more than winds or river currents. But to you, it feels like a gentle, living veil laid across the world, softening every sound. Even the distant caw of a crow seems muffled, curling into the mist. You notice the occasional ripple, a fish breaking the surface or the subtle wake of a passing boat, disturbing the mirror-like surface of the river. Fringe tales suggest that some captains swore certain fog patterns were the whispers of river spirits, guiding or warning them along the treacherous bends. You can't help but feel that, just for a moment, the fog itself is alive, exhaling quietly over the banks. The wooden pilings underfoot creak softly as you trudge along, a rhythm perfectly synchronized with your own slow, contemplative steps. As your eyes adjust, you begin to notice the distant shapes of paddle wheelers, their enormous wheels turning with a slow, hypnotic regularity. The river reflects their lights like fireflies caught in water, making each steamer appear ethereal, almost unreal. The sound of the paddles is gentle yet persistent, a low, rolling thrum that vibrates through your chest. You imagine standing on deck, letting the soft, incessant rhythm lull you as you drift into the steady heartbeat of 19th century river life. Even the simple sight of lanterns swinging from the pilot house sends a flickering warmth across the mist, creating comforting pools of light in the surrounding gray. The riverbanks themselves hold secrets. You notice a small grove of cypress trees, their knees rising from the water like ancient sentinels, draped in delicate Spanish moss. You step carefully between them, aware of the squish of mud underfoot and the occasional splash of a wary turtle. The air smells faintly of damp wood and wildflowers, the mingling of natural fragrance with the ever-present river mist, creating a strangely calming aroma. Historians still argue whether early steamboat traffic permanently altered the river's ecosystem, or if the wildlife adapted seamlessly to the increasing presence of humans and steam engines. A solitary heron rises silently from the shallow waters, its wings stirring the fog into swirling eddies. You follow its glide with your gaze, imagining the long journey these birds have made along the Mississippi's entire course, from its source to the Gulf. Fringe accounts tell of some captains claiming that the appearance of a heron near dawn meant a safe passage for the day, a superstition that some say saved more lives than navigational charts alone. You feel the hum of anticipation in the mist, an invisible network of stories and warnings threading through every bend and eddy, each one adding weightless layers to the already thick veil surrounding you. As your eyes roam, you notice faint outlines of abandoned structures clinging to the water's edge. Old warehouses and rotting piers whisper forgotten tales, their timbers groaning softly as if sighing under the weight of centuries. You pause, imagining the lives that once bustled here, dock hands hauling bales of cotton, merchants tallying their ledgers by lantern light, and families watching the river drift by in quiet contemplation. The juxtaposition of movement and stillness is mesmerizing, a delicate tension that pulls you deeper into the river's embrace. Historians still debate whether the economic boom brought by riverboats truly outweighed the risks posed by floods, disease, and fog-bound collisions. A faint chug echoes in the distance, breaking the silence like a gentle drumbeat. You turn toward it and see the outline of a small steamer pushing through the mist, smoke curling lazily from its stack. The paddle wheel's steady churn creates rhythmic ripples that travel outward, distorting the reflections of the riverbank trees and adding a subtle, almost hypnotic animation to the otherwise still scene. Fringe stories suggest that some boats had rituals performed before departure, involving whispered blessings to the river or the burning of fragrant herbs on deck to appease unseen spirits. You can't help but wonder if anyone on board tonight murmured similar incantations, unseen but quietly acknowledged by the river. The water laps softly against the hull of a nearby vessel, a sound that combines both intimacy and mystery. You squat to let your fingers brush the surface, feeling the temperature drop as the night air settles more densely around you. The smell of wet wood and coal smoke intensifies, mingling with the subtle decay of riverbank vegetation, creating a perfume that feels both nostalgic and uncanny. Historians still argue whether these scents played a psychological role in calming passengers and crew, or if they were simply incidental byproducts of life on the river. You take a slow step back, letting your eyes roam along the dock. Lanterns flicker along the pilings, creating shifting shadows that seem to reach into the fog, almost like the hands of long-forgotten workers stretching across time. The air hums faintly with the mingled energy of water, mist, and wood, a gentle ASMR rhythm in itself. Fringe accounts claim that late at night, some passers-by reported hearing faint singing drifting from the river, neither alive nor entirely spectral, just a lullaby carried on the current. You smile softly, imagining yourself as one of those listeners, suspended in time, letting the river hum you gently toward a slower, dreamlike consciousness. A sudden ripple, subtle but distinct, catches your attention. You follow it with your gaze, realizing it's a cat paddling lazily in the shallows near a rotting pier. Oddly enough, riverboat cats were once considered good luck, guardians of the food stores and companions to solitary pilots. You crouch, imagining the life of one such feline, eyes glinting in lantern light, and the gentle reassurance of an animal companion against the vastness of the fog-wrapped river. Historians still argue whether these small domestic presences truly improved morale, or if the superstition simply embellished their roles. The fog thickens further, curling around the pilings and creeping along the decks of the moored vessels. You take a deep breath, feeling it fill your lungs with that humid, slightly metallic tang of river air. It's the kind of air that softens edges, muffles the world, and nudges you into a slower cadence, where thoughts drift lazily like floating logs. Fringe accounts whisper of ghostly shapes emerging from the mist, following boats or vanishing when approached, a reminder of the countless stories layered over this river. You let the idea settle without judgment, simply appreciating the gentle thrill it provides as you wander closer to the edge, ready to step onto the first paddle wheeler. The hull beneath your feet creaks slightly as you climb aboard, a welcoming, hollow sound that seems to echo into the fog itself. The warm hiss of the boiler reaches your ears as the engine hums in preparation for departure, mingling with the distant calls of night birds. You find yourself standing on the deck, inhaling the mingled scents of wet wood, coal, and river mist, and letting the hypnotic rhythm of the paddle wheel reach your chest. Historians still argue whether the early design of these steamers truly optimized comfort or merely balanced functionality with the necessities of river navigation. But for now, it doesn't matter. You're here, drifting gently into the river's quiet embrace, suspended between past and present, reality and the soft, whispering stories of the Mississippi. You settle more fully onto the paddle wheel steamer, letting your fingers trail along the polished rail as the boat begins its slow, deliberate push into the fog. The gentle churning of the wheel beneath you becomes a hypnotic rhythm, a soft, mechanical heartbeat echoing across the misty river. Each turn sends ripples outward, blurring reflections of cypress knees, moored barges, and distant lanterns into smudges of gold and gray. Fringe tales whisper that some captains believed these rhythms could soothe river spirits, as if the very motion of the wheel lulled the unseen guardians into calm, allowing the boat to pass without incident. You smile at the idea, imagining a crew in matching lullabies to the wheel's pulse, humming quietly to coax safety from the fog. The deck beneath your feet smells faintly of damp wood and coal dust, a comforting mixture that roots you in the moment. You notice a line of barrels brimming with supplies, sacks of flour, bales of cotton, bundles of tobacco, and a few crates marked with unfamiliar symbols. Historians still argue whether these crates contain mostly mundane cargo or if some truly hid smuggled curiosities and contraband, small secrets tucked behind false bottoms and clever locks. You can almost picture the stevedores lifting these containers carefully, murmuring jokes about secret treasures, their boots squeaking against the deck planks in time with the paddle wheel's rotation. As you lean against the rail, the fog swirls thicker, curling tendrils of mist around the boat's bow. The river seems alive here, a silent, undulating presence that holds both calm and subtle menace. You can just make out the shape of another steamer in the distance, its lights appearing like the eyes of a deep-water creature watching your passage. Fringe accounts suggest that on nights like this, some travelers swore they glimpsed phantom vessels, emerging from the fog only to vanish without a trace. You shiver slightly, not from fear exactly, but from the eerie, almost reverent hush of the river, as if it too were holding its breath. You hear the crew moving about the deck, soft footsteps muffled by the thick fog. One of the deckhands hums a tune, and the sound blends almost magically with the steady churn of the paddle wheel. You catch a whiff of pipe smoke, bitter and sweet at once, curling from the engineer's station near the boiler. Fringe stories claim some engineers created small brass whistles or charms to charm the river, tapping a rhythm into the fog to guide the wheel, and you can't help but imagine these little inventions vibrating along the hull, tiny guardians against misfortune. Historians still debate whether these devices actually help navigation or were mostly morale boosters, but the effect is undeniable. The wheel's rhythmic pulse feels safer, somehow harmonized with the gentle superstition. The morning sun, if it can be called that in such thick mist, filters through in muted silver beams, creating spectral patches of light across the deck. You notice a solitary heron perched on a piling, one leg tucked under, watching the river with an eerie stillness. Fringe lore maintains that such birds were considered omens, good or bad depending on their movements, and some captains timed their departures to the heron's behavior, as though consulting a winged oracle. You let the image settle in your mind, feeling the slow tug of curiosity and imagination mingle with the hypnotic sensation of motion. A small group of passengers emerges from the cabins, wrapped in shawls and scarves against the damp chill. The scent of lavender and cedar from the interiors mixes faintly with the river mist, creating a comforting, almost dreamlike atmosphere. You notice the variety of people aboard: merchants clutching ledgers, families with children tugging on tiny hands, and a few solitary figures leaning over the rails, staring into the gray swirl. Historians still argue whether these early passenger steamers were more for commerce or comfort, but the mingling of lives here, quiet and gentle, feels timeless. You step closer to the railing, tracing the worn wood with your fingertips. The paddle wheel's churn creates a steady, rolling vibration, traveling upward into your chest, syncing with your heartbeat. Fringe tales whisper that some river spirits preferred a constant motion, guiding vessels that honored their rhythm and warning those that ignored it. You hum softly along with the wheel, a gesture of complicity, and find your mind relaxing into the gentle, monotonous cadence. Even the occasional splash of a fish breaking the water's surface becomes part of the hypnotic soundscape. Across the deck, a pair of deckhands move carefully around a crate of tobacco, their conversation muffled and low. They joke about the haunted crate, claiming it moans if disturbed, and you smile, letting yourself be drawn into their quiet camaraderie. Historians still debate whether these kinds of stories were mere entertainment or served to instill caution among inexperienced crew, but the effect is subtle, a soft tension that keeps everyone alert while the fog holds them in a cocoon of quiet mystery. You notice the engineer leaning over the boiler, the hiss of steam punctuating his measured movements. Fringe sources suggest that some of these early engines had minor quirks. brass valves that rattled at specific pitches, supposedly to signal unseen dangers downstream. You imagine the engineer tapping the valve gently, a ritualistic gesture, mixing practicality with superstition, while the paddle wheel hums below like a steady, comforting metronome. Historians still argue whether these auditory anomalies actually served any purpose beyond superstition, but the combined effect on the crew is undeniable, a calm vigilance tempered by rhythm. As the boat glides past a bend, you notice shadows of cypress trees rising and falling like slow dancers in the fog. The river smells sharper here, hints of damp earth mingling with the faint smoke of upstream boilers. Fringe accounts suggest that some river folk avoided bends at certain hours, claiming the spirits of the drowned lingered there, moving silently just below the surface. You allow yourself a slow shiver, a gentle acknowledgement of the unseen, letting it mingle with the steady pulse of the paddle wheel and the soft hum of conversation around you. The deck creaks softly beneath your weight as you wander toward the bow, tracing the lines of ropes coiled neatly along the rails. The boat's lights flicker in the mist, reflections stretching outward like ghostly hands trying to reach the river's distant banks. You notice a small brass lantern swinging lightly from a hook, casting warm, wavering light across the deck. Fringe stories say that such lanterns were thought to appease mischievous spirits lurking near the wheelhouse, and for a moment, you allow yourself to imagine their faint, playful influence on the river. A quiet cough echoes from the galley below, a reminder that life continues in small, intimate rhythms, despite the haunting beauty surrounding you. Historians still debate how much the daily routines, cooking, cleaning, maintaining the engine, were shaped by superstition versus efficiency. But here, enveloped in fog and motion, the distinction feels irrelevant. You inhale the mixed scents, letting each one mingle with the pulse of the paddle wheel, as if the river itself were breathing through you, carrying you gently into a deeper state of awareness and relaxation. The mist thickens again as the steamer continues its slow advance, and you watch reflections blur and merge into each other, trees, lanterns, water, and hulls becoming a single dreamlike entity. Fringe tales tell of sailors claiming to see fleeting shapes just beyond the rail, shadows that vanish when approached, perhaps echoes of those who once traveled these waters. You smile softly, leaning against the railing, and let the gentle motion of the river, the rhythmic hum of the wheel, and the soft, whispering fog settle your thoughts, preparing you for the stories yet to drift past your ears. The first light of dawn filters through the mist, muted and silvery, as you find yourself wandering along the deck of the steamer, observing the crew begin their morning rituals. You trudge slowly, letting the gentle sway of the boat guide your steps, your ears attuned to the soft squish of wet wood beneath your boots. Crew members unfurl canvas awnings, sweep away river dust, and toss ropes with a practiced, almost meditative precision. There's a rhythm to their movements, a quiet harmony that seems to flow naturally from the river itself. Fringe tales suggest that some captains encourage the crew to maintain particular patterns in their work, believing it would appease river spirits who watched over the Mississippi bends. You can't help but wonder if it's superstition or simply a method to prevent chaos. But either way, it adds an oddly soothing cadence to the morning. A ship's cat rubs against your ankles as you pass, its sleek body moving silently across the damp deck. These feline companions were common aboard riverboats, believed to guard food stores and keep vermin at bay, though historians still debate whether their presence was primarily practical or whether the superstitions surrounding them truly shaped crew behavior. You stoop to scratch the cat behind the ears, feeling the warmth of its fur against your fingers. Fringe accounts claim that cats often behaved erratically when spirits were near, arching their backs or staring into empty corners of the deck. You glance around the mist and let your imagination run for a moment, picturing the unseen watchers of the river gliding just beyond the edges of visibility. The air carries the smell of damp timber, coal smoke, and the faint tang of river mud, a combination that seems to anchor you firmly in the moment. The low, steady churning of the paddle wheel beneath you adds a hypnotic thrum, vibrating softly through your chest. You notice deckhands carefully maneuvering bales of cotton, tobacco bundles, and crates filled with mundane supplies, but fringe tales whisper of hidden curiosities tucked away in false-bottom chests, mysterious parcels that may never have reached their intended destinations. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of smuggling on these early steamers significantly impacted local economies, but for now it's enough to imagine the quiet conspiracies happening around you while the boat glides through the mist. You pause at the railing, watching the river's surface swirl in subtle eddies, the reflection of the fog creating shifting shapes that seem to dance and twist like shadowy figures. The paddle wheel's rhythmic churn pushes water outward, sending gentle ripples across the mirrored surface. Fringe stories suggest that spirits of lost travelers sometimes followed boats in the mist, moving just beneath the surface as faint, luminescent shapes. You shake your head lightly, a small smile forming as you acknowledge the river's quiet, mysterious presence. Historians still debate whether such stories were widely believed or were simply embellishments to entertain travelers during long, monotonous journeys. A deckhand hums a low tune while polishing the brass railing, and you notice the melody seems to harmonize with the paddle wheel's rotation, blending seamlessly into the river's ambient soundtrack. Some fringe accounts suggest that early musicians aboard riverboats performed specific songs to calm the spirits or maintain good luck, though historians argue whether these practices were ceremonial or purely coincidental. You hum along quietly, feeling the gentle vibration of the music, the boat, and the river itself merging into a single, meditative rhythm. There's a subtle humor in imagining the entire crew collectively conducting the river with music and motion, a shared ritual of order in the midst of watery uncertainty. You wander past the cabins, noting the scents of lavender, cedar, and faint river mud wafting from the slightly open doors. Passengers begin emerging, wrapped in shawls and heavy coats, carrying tea or small parcels. The cabins are modest but orderly, with neatly arranged bedding and the faint echo of whispered conversations. Fringe stories suggest that some passengers believe cabins closest to the boiler held protective properties, as the warmth supposedly warded off unseen spirits. Historians still debate whether the superstition influenced cabin assignment, but you imagine the small, comforting rituals passengers relied upon, quietly stitching together the sense of security aboard the moving vessel. At the bow, you find yourself drawn to the edge of the deck, gazing into the thickening mist. Trees along the riverbank rise and fall like ghostly dancers, their cypress knees casting long shadows into the swirling water. The paddle wheel's steady rhythm continues, a soft pulse beneath the gentle rocking of the boat. Fringe accounts tell of sightings of luminous shapes flitting near bends in the river at dawn, believed to be spirits guiding, or sometimes warning, travelers. Historians still argue whether these tales stem from optical illusions in the fog or genuine eyewitness reports. But for now, you let the mystery hover quietly in your imagination, neither fully accepted nor dismissed. You notice the engineer leaning over the boiler, brass gauges reflecting the muted dawn light. The hiss of steam punctuates the morning's soft symphony, and fringe sources suggest that some engineers tapped valves or adjusted whistles to produce particular pitches, supposedly to communicate with river spirits or signal safe passage. Historians still debate whether these rituals had any practical impact on navigation or were merely folkloric embellishments, but you can't deny the hypnotic effect of their sound mixing with the river's own rhythm. The gentle vibration under your feet feels reassuring, a constant heartbeat connecting deck, crew, and water. A sudden splash nearby pulls your attention, a catfish or a river turtle breaking the mirrored surface. You bend slightly, fascinated by the ripple spreading outward, distorting the reflections of trees, lanterns, and mist. Fringe stories claim that certain ripples, if timed with the paddle wheel's rotation, were considered good omens, a subtle nudge from the river itself. You chuckle quietly, imagining a superstitious captain meticulously noting each ripple while sipping lukewarm coffee, the river dictating its own quiet rules. Historians still argue whether such rituals were widely practiced or merely colorful tales passed down through generations. Deckhands move crates along, chatting softly about mundane and mysterious happenings alike. One mentions the haunted crate from last night, the kind of story that quietly sets a mood rather than truly frightens anyone. You watch the small rituals, sweeping, coiling ropes, adjusting sails, and marvel at how rhythm, superstition, and practicality blend seamlessly into daily life aboard the steamer. Fringe accounts suggest these minor ceremonies kept morale high, a gentle reassurance amidst the vast, misty expanse of the river. Historians still debate how widespread such practices were, but the effect on you is immediate, a sense of continuity, a gentle flow from one action to the next. A heron lifts from a distant piling, wings slicing through fog and light. Fringe tales often depicted birds as messengers of luck or misfortune, and you let yourself indulge in the quiet idea that its flight might be a signal to the river spirits or a mere coincidence. The paddle wheel churns on, the mist curls around the deck like slow smoke, and you feel a deep sense of being cradled within the river's quiet embrace. Historians still argue about how much animal behavior influenced river lore, but here, in the soft gray light, it seems perfectly plausible. Finally, you pause, leaning against the railing, letting the gentle rocking of the boat, the soft hiss of steam, and the rhythmic churning of the paddle wheel wash over you. Fringe accounts suggest that some early travelers found the combination hypnotic, a natural lullaby coaxing even the most anxious souls into calm contemplation. You close your eyes briefly, breathing deeply, imagining the quiet, watery world stretching endlessly ahead, a tapestry of fog, rhythm, and quiet superstition. Historians still debate how these early river experiences shaped cultural memory, but tonight it's enough to float along, wrapped in the gentle embrace of history, mist, and mechanical lullaby. You wander toward the passenger cabins, letting the mist curling along the deck cling to your coat. The scent of lavender mingled with the faint musk of river mud invites a slower pace, each step deliberate and soft. Inside, the cabins are small but neatly arranged, with wood panels polished to a honeyed glow and bedding folded in precise, almost ritualistic care. You step over the threshold of one door, imagining the hush of early morning passengers adjusting to life aboard the riverboat. Fringe stories suggest that some cabins held secret compartments where travelers tucked away personal talismans to ward off bad luck on long journeys. Historians still debate the prevalence of such hidden spaces, but the thought adds a subtle thrill, as though the walls themselves might whisper tales of past occupants. You move slowly past a family's cabin, where soft murmurs of conversation and the occasional giggle seep through the door. Children's socks peek from under bedding, their small feet moving in sleepy anticipation of the day ahead. The gentle rustle of linens and the faint creak of the hull beneath your boots create a hypnotic rhythm, merging with the distant chug of the paddle wheel. Fringe accounts claim that certain cabins closest to the boiler radiated warmth not only for comfort, but also to appease river spirits, and you can't help but picture passengers tucking themselves in deliberately near that comforting hum. Historians still argue whether this was superstition, a practical concern, or a blend of both, but the effect is unmistakable, a sense of security flowing gently through the small spaces. You linger at the doorway of a single traveler's cabin, noticing the faint aroma of cedar and worn leather, a mixture that speaks to long journeys and quiet solitude. Fringe tales suggest that solitary travelers sometimes kept small charms hanging by the window or tucked into their luggage, believing these objects offered protection against unseen hazards on the river. Historians still debate whether these charms were truly common or if such stories were amplified later, but the ambiance created by their imagined presence is comforting. You let your fingers trace the doorframe, absorbing the intimate details of life within these modest quarters, from the polished brass knobs to the faint scuff marks on the floorboards left by long-departed feet. The air carries a whisper of cooking from the galley below. Faint smells of coffee, baked bread, and sizzling fat curling upward through the cabin doors. You can almost hear the soft clatter of pots and the low murmur of the cook, whose movements are practiced and rhythmic. Fringe accounts mention that certain early morning aromas were thought to carry blessings, easing the spirits of both passengers and crew. Historians still argue whether these beliefs influenced galley routines or were later embellishments, but for you, the smells blend seamlessly with the misty, humid air seeping through the cabin, creating a sense of gentle, enveloping calm. You pass a pair of cabins where elderly travelers sit by small portholes, hands clasped around warm mugs, gazing into the shifting gray of the river beyond. Fringe stories suggest that some old hands claim to see shapes in the mist, phantoms of past travelers, ghostly boats, or flickers of long-forgotten fires along the banks. Historians still debate whether these sightings were purely optical illusions or shared cultural imagination, but in this moment, their presence feels tangible. You allow yourself to imagine faint, silent forms gliding past the windows, their presence neither threatening nor alarming, just another layer of the river's subtle, living tapestry. In one cabin, you notice a bundle of letters tied with fraying twine, the ink faded but the curves of the handwriting alive with memory. Fringe tales claim that lost letters sometimes carried whispers of their writers, faint echoes of voices across time, guiding or consoling those who carried them. Historians still argue whether correspondence had any lasting influence on passenger morale, or if these stories are romantic exaggerations, but you can't help but lean closer, imagining the quiet lives chronicled within the folded paper, drifting gently alongside the river's slow pulse. You pause near the staircase leading to the upper deck, glancing down into the shadowed passage below. The wooden steps creak softly beneath your weight, harmonizing with the distant churn of the paddle wheel. Fringe accounts suggest that shadows in such stairwells were sometimes interpreted as guardian spirits, invisible companions of travelers and crew alike. Historians still debate the cultural significance of these beliefs, but as you stand there, listening to the subtle rhythmic chorus of sounds, the wheel, the crew, the river, you feel a profound sense of temporal continuity, as though the boat itself remembers all who have ever passed through. A small cabin door opens, revealing a young couple quietly packing their belongings, preparing to disembark at the next stop. The scent of fresh linens and the soft murmur of voices blends with the river's natural aroma, creating a delicate olfactory harmony. Fringe stories suggest that the act of packing itself could be ritualistic, a silent acknowledgement of the river's flow in the unpredictable journey ahead. Historians still argue whether these practices were widely observed or largely anecdotal, but the scene carries a gentle poetry, a soft choreography of preparation and anticipation, moving quietly through the mist-wrapped morning. You move past a window where light from the lanterns casts flickering patterns across the walls. Fringe tales whisper that flickering light sometimes reveal glimpses of unseen presences, faint forms in the periphery of vision, silent companions of travelers. Historians still debate whether such phenomena were psychological artifacts or genuine cultural interpretations of mist and shadow, but the effect on your imagination is undeniable. You let your gaze linger on the subtle, shifting patterns, feeling a calm tension, a gentle acknowledgement of the mysterious world beyond the cabin walls. The cabins themselves offer glimpses into personal rituals. A small book left open on a table, a comb brushed neatly against the mirror, a hat carefully perched on a hook. Fringe sources suggest that these minor acts of organization were believed to maintain harmony with the river, a quiet conversation between traveler and water. Historians still argue how pervasive such beliefs were, but the small details combined with the gentle hum of the paddle wheel lull you into a meditative, almost dreamlike awareness. Each object, each gesture, becomes part of the boat's living story, a narrative woven from human routine and subtle superstition. You linger by a porthole, gazing out into the river mist as it curls lazily around the steamer. Fringe accounts claim that shapes seen briefly in such fog, glimpses of trees, lights, or ghostly figures, were interpreted as messages or omens. Historians still debate whether such sightings influenced travel plans or were simply embellishments passed down orally. You let your imagination drift, envisioning silent forms gliding alongside the boat, perfectly calm and unobtrusive, a soft reminder of the layers of history embedded in every bend, every ripple, and every passing vessel. A deckhand appears at the cabin entrance, offering a quiet nod before moving along to the next task. His presence, measured and unobtrusive, blends seamlessly with the ambient sounds. The paddle wheel, the distant calls of birds, the occasional splash of a fish. Fringe stories suggest that crew members sometimes left subtle signals for travelers, marks on doors, arrangements of belongings, to convey good fortune or warn of minor hazards. Historians still debate whether these practices were common or anecdotal, but observing the rhythm of movement aboard the boat, you feel a gentle reassurance, a sense of connectedness to the routines of the past. You pause one last time in the cabin corridor, inhaling the mingled aromas of lavender, cedar, and river mist, and listen to the soft mechanical thrum resonating through the hull. Fringe accounts claim that quiet moments like these, stillness punctuated by subtle vibration, allow travelers to attune to the river's mood, a gentle meditation on motion, mist, and history. Historians still debate the psychological impact of these experiences, but for you, it's enough to notice the soft harmony of elements, the invisible conversation between vessel, crew, passengers, and river, each contributing to the slow, soothing cadence of life afloat. The morning continues to unfold in a soft, rhythmic cadence as you wander toward the cargo area, the subtle creak of deck boards beneath your feet blending with the gentle churn of the paddle wheel. Crates and barrels line the hold, stacked with meticulous care. Bales of cotton, tightly wrapped tobacco, flour sacks, and a few mysterious parcels with faded markings. You kneel to run a hand along a crate, feeling the rough-hewn wood and imagining the countless hands that have lifted it before yours. Fringe stories suggest that some cargo hides odd curiosities, small statues, handwritten letters, even live animals tucked away to avoid inspection. Historians still argue whether smuggling was truly widespread along the Mississippi, or if these tales were exaggerated over time to thrill later generations. You notice the subtle distinction between mundane cargo and parcels that spark a hint of curiosity, like a crate marked with an unfamiliar symbol and a faint sweet odor seeping through the slats. You imagine the stevedores' private jokes as they maneuvered these items, careful not to spill secrets. Some fringe accounts claim that crew members would whisper to the packages, believing the objects inside might carry their own spirits or energies. Historians still debate whether these rituals were common practice or simply fanciful stories, but the idea adds a gentle layer of mystery to the otherwise ordinary activity of loading and unloading goods. The river glimmers faintly through the fog, reflecting the paddle wheel's slow, constant rotation. You watch as the crew navigates stacks of cotton bales, the material soft yet heavy, moving with precise, coordinated effort. Fringe tales suggest that certain bundles were believed to attract protective spirits when carried correctly, perhaps a subtle fusion of superstition and practical handling techniques. Historians still argue about the real influence of these beliefs on cargo management, but as you observe, the movements feel choreographed, almost ritualistic, blending necessity with an undercurrent of quiet magic. You step around a barrel of flour, noting the faint trail of powder on the deck, a small whisper of human presence, a signature of countless mornings like this one. Fringe stories tell of containers with hidden compartments, where travelers might store letters, coins, or small charms to safeguard against the river's unpredictability. Historians still debate how prevalent these hidden spaces were, but the thought of unseen treasures tucked within the ordinary stacks of cargo adds a playful intrigue to the river's daily rhythm. You smile, imagining a small charm nestled inside a crate, silently influencing the voyage as the paddle wheel churns steadily beneath. The crew works in near-silent harmony, their movements guided by years of experience and perhaps an unspoken reverence for the river itself. You pause to watch a deckhand lift a particularly heavy bale, the muscles in his arms straining under the weight, yet his movements remain fluid, almost dance-like. Fringe accounts suggest that some workers would hum or chant quietly during such labor, rhythms meant to appease the river spirits or keep energy flowing. Historians still debate whether these practices had any measurable effect, but observing the coordinated effort, it's hard not to imagine a subtle, mystical cadence threading through the physical exertion. As you move toward the railing, the mist rolls in again, thick and curling, obscuring the opposite bank. You can just make out the shadowy outlines of cypress knees and low-lying docks in the distance. Fringe tales whisper that hidden parcels or unusual cargo sometimes influence river currents or brought luck or misfortune to certain stretches of water. Historians still argue about the origin and validity of these stories, but the visual effect of the fog and reflected light makes the entire scene feel like a stage for whispered mysteries and gentle intrigue. You lean lightly on the rail, absorbing the rhythm of motion and mist, letting the world narrow to the gentle pulse of boat and river. The soundscape shifts subtly, the soft thud of crates being adjusted, the hiss of steam from the boiler below, and the low rolling churn of the paddle wheel. You catch faint smells from the hold, the earthy scent of tobacco mixing with wood dust, a sensory reminder of labor and trade. Fringe accounts suggest that the correct handling of certain goods could ward off minor accidents, like avoiding the misplacement of a crate to keep spirits content. Historians still debate whether these practices were ritualistic, superstitious, or purely practical, but the combined effect is soothing, a rhythm, a sense of deliberate, attentive care stretching across deck and cargo. You notice a curious glint from one of the crates, a reflection of the lantern swinging lightly on the deck. Fringe stories claim that such glints occasionally signaled the presence of hidden objects, letters, or charms, unseen by casual observers. Historians still argue over how common these hidden hints were, but for now, your imagination drifts gently, entertained by the thought of a secret tucked quietly among the ordinary loads. The river hums around you, a living backdrop to the mundane and mysterious, blending labor, superstition, and the hypnotic motion of the paddle wheel into one seamless lullaby. A deckhand passes nearby, nodding briefly as he moves a particularly large bale of cotton. You watch the fluidity of his movements, each motion economical yet elegant, like a slow, deliberate dance choreographed by experience and necessity. Fringe accounts suggest that handling certain goods in specific sequences brought luck or avoided mishaps, a quiet ritual intertwined with practicality. Historians still debate whether this was a standard practice or anecdotal embellishment, but the combination of rhythm, fog, and human motion creates a gentle sense of flow that pulls your mind deeper into the river's embrace. You lean again on the railing, letting the faint vibration of the hull beneath your feet synchronize with the paddle wheel's motion. The crates, barrels, and bales form a quiet, almost cathedral-like pattern across the deck, each a small element in the larger, hypnotic rhythm of river life. Fringe tales whisper of hidden messages or charms tucked within cargo, invisible threads linking crew, passengers, and river in a subtle dialogue. Historians still argue about the factual accuracy of these tales, but you allow yourself to float within the narrative, each gentle vibration and rustle a soft punctuation in the ongoing, mist-wrapped story of the Mississippi. Nearby, a barrel top creaks softly as a deckhand shifts it, a small sound that blends with the low rolling churn of the paddle wheel. You watch the subtle play of shadow and fog around the cargo, light from the lanterns flickering and stretching across barrels and crates, turning mundane objects into ephemeral, almost magical shapes. Fringe stories suggest that some travelers believed cargo could carry faint echoes of previous voyages, memories trapped in wood and cloth, drifting quietly across water. Historians still debate whether this idea held practical weight or remained folklore, but the visual effect is mesmerizing, a hypnotic interplay of motion, mist, and imagination. A crate of tobacco sways slightly with the boat's gentle roll, the scent mingling with the metallic tang of river water and faint coal smoke. Fringe accounts hint that this aroma itself could influence spirits, an olfactory charm subtly infusing the river air. Historians still argue whether such beliefs impacted handling protocols or were merely anecdotal, but the blend of sensory cues, scent, sound, motion, creates a meditative atmosphere. You close your eyes briefly, inhaling, letting the rhythm of the crew's movements, the subtle thrum of the paddle wheel, and the river's soft murmur settle your mind, merging labor and lore into a calming current. The river itself seems to deepen the hypnotic effect, each bend and ripple reflecting the dance of cargo, crew, and fog. Fringe stories claim that certain stretches of the Mississippi were more spirit-laden, subtly influencing the way cargo and crew interacted. Historians still debate the origins and influence of such beliefs, but you feel their intangible presence, a soft, guiding hand in the background of morning routines. You breathe slowly, letting the gentle hum of life aboard the steamer, the subtle vibrations of the hull, and the rhythmic paddle wheel lull you further into the quiet mystery of river commerce. You find yourself drawn toward the engine room, the warm hiss of the boilers reaching your ears like a gentle whisper coaxing you closer. The smell of hot metal, steam, and faint coal smoke wraps around you, a sensory embrace that is both grounding and hypnotic. You trace your fingers along the railing leading down to the engineer's station, noticing small brass fittings glinting in the soft, diffused light. Fringe accounts suggest that engineers sometimes tap these valves in precise rhythms, believing the notes might charm the river or alert unseen guardians to the boat's presence. Historians still argue whether these practices had any practical benefit or were largely ceremonial, but the effect is calming. A steady, reassuring pulse beneath your feet, beneath the hull, beneath the mist itself. The engineer leans over the main boiler, adjusting a small valve with deliberate care. Steam hisses, curling upward in delicate white tendrils, merging with the fog that drifts down from the deck above. You notice his hands, so accustomed to the machinery that each movement seems choreographed, almost ritualistic. Fringe tales claim that some early engineers believed particular sequences of valve adjustments could influence the river's mood or even ward off minor accidents. Historians still debate whether these rituals were widely practiced or mostly anecdotal, but watching him, the precision and reverence of his actions feel almost magical. A secret dialogue with the river's hidden currents. A soft, rhythmic thrum vibrates through the floorboards as the paddle wheel churns steadily outside. You place a hand on the warm brass of the engine casing, feeling the subtle oscillations, a mechanical heartbeat echoing across the boat. Fringe stories whisper that early engineers sometimes synchronized their movements with this natural pulse, believing the river responded to human rhythm. Historians still argue whether such coordination influenced navigation. But for you, the combined effect, the hum of machinery, the hiss of steam, the muted fog outside, creates a deep, almost meditative immersion into the mechanics and myths of river life. You notice small quirks in the machinery, a brass whistle that occasionally squeaks, a lever that hums when engaged, minor vibrations running through the bolts. Fringe accounts suggest these odd noises were interpreted as signals from spirits or guardians of the river, a subtle language understood only by those attuned to the vessel's pulse. Historians still debate whether these interpretations were widespread or isolated anecdotes, but the interplay of sound, motion, and mist creates a unique atmosphere, one that blends practicality with an almost mystical sense of companionship with the river. The engineer pours a small amount of oil into a pivoting rod, the liquid glinting in the soft light. Fringe tales claim that the reflective gleam of oil or polished brass could catch the attention of river spirits, keeping them content and preventing mischief. Historians still argue whether this belief influenced routine maintenance or remained a playful superstition. But you watch the careful, deliberate gestures as if witnessing a subtle ritual, a quiet performance performed daily in sync with the river's rhythms. The hiss of steam punctuates the scene, adding an irregular punctuation to the otherwise steady drone of machinery. The warmth of the boiler room contrasts sharply with the damp chill of the fog-wrapped deck above. You lean against a support beam, feeling the gentle vibration beneath your feet and through the rails of the hull. Fringe sources suggest that engineers often developed a kind of intuition about the river's temperament, sensing changes in water, wind, and fog through the resonance of the machinery. Historians still debate the accuracy of these claims, but as you stand, the subtle oscillations, combined with hiss and thrum, create a calming, almost trance-like immersion, a tactile conversation with the river itself. A soft whistle pierces the low hum, brief and high-pitched. The engineer adjusts a valve, and the sound disappears, replaced by the gentle roar of steam and the churning rhythm of the paddle wheel. Fringe accounts suggest that some whistles were intentionally tuned to mimic natural sounds, like the call of a heron or the rush of a hidden tributary to appease spirits. Historians still debate whether these sounds had practical or symbolic value, but you feel a sense of quiet enchantment, as if the boat itself were alive, communicating through brass and vapor, rhythm, and pulse. The low light of the engine room glows amber against dark wood and polished metal. You take in the machinery's complexity. Rods, wheels, pistons, and belts, all working in harmony, powered by human labor and coal-fed steam. Fringe stories whisper that some engineers spoke softly to the engines, offering small blessings or muttered good luck charms. Historians still argue whether these murmured rituals truly influenced outcomes, but the gentleness of the practice, paired with the hypnotic soundscape, is soothing, a slow, deliberate meditation wrapped in metal and vapor. You notice a small notebook resting near the engineer's station, filled with sketches, annotations, and curious symbols. Fringe accounts claim that some engineers documented subtle occurrences, patterns in fog, peculiar shifts in paddle wheel rhythm, or glimpses of shadowy shapes on the river. Historians still debate whether these notes were technical logs or encoded folklore, but the notebook feels like a bridge between practical knowledge and imaginative storytelling, a quiet testament to the blending of fact and legend aboard every Mississippi steamer. A steady hiss rises from the boiler, mingling with the subtle hum of machinery and the distant churning paddle wheel. Fringe tales suggest that steam itself carried spiritual significance, its vapor rising to meet the mist as a form of gentle communication with unseen guardians. Historians still argue whether this notion had any real influence on crew behavior, but for you, the combined scent, sound, and motion creates a lullaby-like atmosphere, one that invites calm attention and a soft, meditative focus on the present. You glance up, noticing light filtering down from the deck above, soft and muted through the fog and steam. The interplay of brightness and shadow dances across polished brass and dark wood, a visual rhythm complementing the mechanical one beneath your feet. Fringe sources suggest that some engineers timed maintenance around natural light, believing it aligned with river spirits' attentiveness. Historians still debate the practical versus mystical motivation for such timing, but the effect on your senses is undeniable. A gentle, almost magical immersion into the boat's world. The vibration of the hull and the gentle pulse of the paddle wheel continue as you step carefully back toward the deck, leaving the warm hiss and brass gleam behind. Fringe tales claim that the river itself responded to machinery tuned correctly, currents bending subtly to the boat's harmonious rhythm. Historians still argue whether this is metaphorical or literal, but for now it suffices to imagine that every turn of the paddle wheel, every hiss of steam, carries the vessel forward with the quiet blessing of unseen companions. You pause at the hatch, inhaling the mixed scents of coal, steam, and mist. The warmth of the engine room contrasts with the cool, damp air outside, creating a gentle sensory boundary that you cross slowly, deliberately. Fringe accounts suggest that such transitions, moving from warm boiler to fog-wrapped deck, were considered moments to pause and attune oneself to the river's flow. Historians still debate whether this was common practice or anecdotal, but the rhythm of crossing spaces becomes a ritual in itself, a quiet meditation on the layers of life aboard a steamer. The paddle wheel churns below, echoing in harmony with the hiss of the boilers and the soft murmurs of the crew above. You let yourself lean on the railing once more, eyes tracing the blurred outlines of trees, lanterns, and distant banks through the mist. Fringe stories whisper that engineers sometimes felt presences, subtle energies moving with the river, guiding or observing their work. Historians still debate whether these sensations were genuine experiences or the product of imaginative storytelling, but the combined effect, the pulse of machine, mist, and water, is hypnotic, enveloping you in a slow, soothing rhythm. Finally, you step fully onto the deck, the warmth of the engine room lingering on your skin. The mist curls gently around the hull, mixing with the steam rising from below. Fringe tales suggest that leaving the boiler room with a sense of reverence allowed safe passage, a symbolic blessing for the journey ahead. Historians still argue whether such rituals were intentional or coincidental, but you let the notion settle gently in your mind. The paddle wheel hums beneath you, the mist hugs the deck, and the river itself seems to exhale, carrying you forward in its timeless, hypnotic current. You wander back toward the bow, letting the mist wrap around your shoulders as the river stretches endlessly before you. The gentle rocking of the steamer guides your steps, each movement deliberate and slow, matching the hypnotic rhythm of the paddle wheel churning below. Shadows of cypress knees rise from the water like silent sentinels, their gnarled roots piercing the fog in dark, wavering shapes. Fringe stories whisper that these trees sometimes moved in subtle ways when spirits were near, bending or twisting in the faintest gusts of wind. Historians still debate whether such beliefs were widespread or merely local superstition, but the effect is mesmerizing, a slow unfolding of river mystery that tugs gently at your imagination. A small heron perches on a piling, one leg tucked neatly under, watching your passage with unwavering patience. Fringe accounts suggest that birds like this were considered omens, their quiet vigilance signaling safe passage or subtle warnings, depending on their movements. Historians still argue whether river travelers genuinely trusted these signs or treated them as charming tales to amuse themselves during long journeys. But the heron's stillness, combined with the thick fog curling around the deck, feels like an unspoken conversation between the world and the traveler. You breathe slowly, letting the cool mist mingle with the gentle rhythm of the river and the steady pulse of the paddle wheel. Your eyes drift to the distant shoreline, blurred and softened by the thick mist. Wooden piers jut from the banks, abandoned or partially submerged, ghostly silhouettes that might once have bustled with labor. Fringe tales whisper of lost settlements and forgotten landings, swallowed by floods or decay, their histories preserved only in whispered anecdotes passed among captains and crews. Historians still debate the precise locations and fates of these vanished ports, but as you watch, it's easy to imagine the quiet, spectral echoes of footsteps and carts moving through these long, silent spaces. You step closer to the rail, tracing the worn wood with your fingers, feeling the subtle grooves left by countless travelers before you. The mist curls upward, dampening sound and heightening the sense of isolation, yet the paddle wheel's thrum remains a comforting constant. Fringe stories tell of travelers seeing faint shapes moving in the fog, perhaps spirits of those who never reached their destinations. Historians still argue whether these sightings were optical illusions, misinterpretations of light, or genuine experiences. But the sensation of being watched, gently and without menace, threads through the river's ambient hush, a soft tension that draws the imagination deeper. A deckhand appears nearby, adjusting a coil of rope, his movements slow and precise. You notice the quiet coordination of tasks aboard the vessel, each gesture contributing to the smooth passage of the steamer. Fringe accounts suggest that such deliberate rhythmic work maintained harmony with river spirits, small rituals embedded in the mundane. Historians still debate whether these practices were practical or symbolic, but for now, the choreography of hands, ropes, and the rolling deck creates a hypnotic meditation, a gentle lullaby of human activity blended seamlessly with the river's own rhythms. You watch the river's surface undulate in gentle swirls, reflections of mist and trees merging into soft, ghostly patterns. Fringe stories claim that subtle changes in the water's flow were interpreted as messages or signs, guiding captains and deckhands alike. Historians still argue about the accuracy of these interpretations, but the mesmerizing motion of ripples, shadows, and reflections feels as intentional as any human choreography. You let your eyes follow the patterns, each eddy and swirl drawing you further into a state of contemplative calm. The sound of a distant whistle drifts from the engine room, blending with the low roar of the paddle wheel and the occasional splash of a passing fish. Fringe tales suggest that whistles carried coded messages or subtle blessings to unseen guardians, and some captains treated the sounds with ceremonial care. Historians still debate whether these interpretations influenced navigation or were storytelling embellishments. But the combination of auditory cues, the hiss of steam, the mechanical pulse, and the river's own murmur, creates a comforting, rhythmic soundtrack to the fog-draped morning. You notice a floating log drifting alongside the steamer, bobbing gently in time with the current. Fringe stories maintain that such logs could carry spirits, or at least the faint memory of those lost to the river. Historians still debate the origins of these beliefs, but the visual effect, a solitary, slow-moving companion paralleling your passage, adds a quiet sense of enchantment. You watch as the log tilts slightly, caught in an eddy, a subtle reminder that even the smallest objects can participate in the river's slow hypnotic ballet. The mist thickens, curling in slow tendrils around the bow. Lantern light flickers through the gray, casting wavering patterns on wet wood and brass fittings. Fringe accounts suggest that flickering lights were believed to communicate with spirits or signal unseen entities nearby, a visual language understood only by those attuned to the river's subtle messages. Historians still debate the reality of such sightings, but the interplay of light, shadow, and fog weaves a delicate, almost magical tapestry across the deck, inviting gentle attention and calm curiosity. You notice the gentle creak of a pulley as cargo is adjusted, soft enough to blend seamlessly with the ambient sounds of water, paddle wheel, and distant bird call. Fringe stories claim that even mundane mechanical noises could be imbued with significance, interpreted as signals from guardians or echoes of previous voyages. Historians still argue whether these beliefs had practical influence, but you can't help but hear the subtle rhythm, the quiet pulse of repeated human action, harmonizing with natural forces, a hypnotic duet of movement and sound. The deck sways lightly as you move, your fingers brushing damp ropes coiled neatly along the rail. Fringe accounts suggest that the careful arrangement of equipment might influence the spirits or energies aboard, a slow ritual embedded in everyday tasks. Historians still debate whether such practices were widely followed, but observing the meticulous order and subtle choreography, you feel a quiet reassurance, a sense that the river and its guardians are watching kindly, approvingly, or at least passively engaged with the passage. A sudden ripple passes the hull, small but noticeable, distorting reflections of trees and mist. Fringe tales whisper that ripples often carried omens or subtle messages, each eddy interpreted by experienced travelers. Historians still argue whether this was practical knowledge or fanciful storytelling, but the gentle oscillation reinforces the hypnotic rhythm. Paddle wheel, fog, ripples, and the quiet choreography of life aboard the steamer. You inhale slowly, letting the river's subtle communication merge with your own steady breathing, a synchronized meditation on motion and mist. You notice a lone cabin lantern flicker, briefly illuminating the deck's textures, from the polished wood to coils of rope and stacked cargo. Fringe stories maintain that such flashes were sometimes considered signs from spirits or echoes of past journeys, small visual cues to guide or reassure. Historians still debate the prevalence and significance of such interpretations, but the interplay of light, fog, and shadow deepens your sense of immersive calm, an almost cinematic layering of mystery and quiet observation. Finally, you lean gently on the railing, feeling the subtle pulse of the hull, the cool mist on your cheeks, and the rhythmic churning of the paddle wheel below. Fringe accounts whisper that moments of quiet reflection, attuned to the river's subtle movements, offered travelers a sense of communion with unseen forces, a meditative practice of sorts. Historians still debate whether this attunement was intentional or a byproduct of monotony, but you feel the gentle embrace of history, fog, and water, a calm, continuous current guiding you forward in both time and imagination. You wander toward the midship deck, letting the soft mist curl around your coat and hair. The gentle rocking of the steamer keeps time with the paddle wheel below, a hypnotic rhythm that guides your steps. Lanterns hang from posts, their flickering light casting long, wavering shadows across damp wood and coiled ropes. Fringe tales claim that the way lanterns swung in the fog could signal the presence of spirits or lost travelers lingering along the riverbanks. Historians still debate whether these observations held any practical meaning or were simply embellishments in local storytelling. But the effect is mesmerizing, a faint suggestion that the river itself is alive with hidden watchers. The smell of damp wood mingles with the faint tang of coal smoke from the engine room below. You pause to inhale, letting the combination anchor you in the present moment, while also imagining the river's past passengers who passed along the same corridor. Fringe accounts whisper that certain scents, coal smoke, damp timber, river mud, could calm anxious passengers or signal safe passage. Historians still argue whether these beliefs influence behavior or remain folklore, but the sensory experience is soothing, grounding you in a gentle rhythm of sound, smell, and movement. You step past a group of deckhands, carefully moving barrels, their synchronized motions creating a quiet choreography across the misty deck. Fringe tales suggest that some crews intentionally move cargo in precise patterns to honor the river spirits or maintain harmony on board. Historians still debate whether such rituals were widely practiced or mostly anecdotal. But watching the flow of human motion, you notice a subtle poetry, repetition, rhythm, and coordination blending seamlessly with the water's own cadence. You breathe slowly, letting the pattern of movement lull your mind into gentle contemplation. A lone heron lifts from the water's edge, wings slicing through the fog with barely a whisper. Fringe stories claim that birds like these sometimes guided travelers or warned of hidden currents. Historians still argue whether these stories were taken seriously by most river folk or simply shared as cautionary entertainment, but the heron's flight is hypnotic, its slow, deliberate motion a visual echo of the paddle wheel's constant churning below. You let your eyes follow it, imagining the subtle dialogue between the natural world and human passage. You pause near a stack of crates, noticing a faint, sweet aroma seeping from one tightly sealed box. Fringe accounts suggest that some cargo, spices, dried herbs, or mysterious curiosities, was believed to carry subtle protective properties. Historians still debate the veracity and prevalence of these beliefs, but for now the scent is enough to draw your attention, a gentle sensory layer atop the visual and auditory tapestry of deck, mist, and river. You lean slightly, inhaling, feeling a deep meditative calm settle across your shoulders. The paddle wheel thumps steadily, a constant mechanical heartbeat underpinning the river's own flow. You run a hand along the damp railing, the worn wood smooth beneath your fingers, traces of countless hands who traverse this same deck before you. Fringe stories suggest that touching certain parts of the boat could invite good luck or protection for the journey. Historians still argue whether these small gestures were widespread or largely anecdotal, but the tactile connection deepens your immersion. You are part of a living continuum of movement, mist, and ritual, a soft thread in the river's enduring story. A deckhand whistles a faint tune as he adjusts a coil of rope, the sound mingling with the ambient noise of water, fog, and paddle wheel. Fringe tales suggest that these small songs could attract friendly spirits or soothe the river's mood, a gentle auditory charm integrated into daily work. Historians still debate whether such practices were practical or symbolic, but the melody blends seamlessly with the misty morning, a soft counterpoint to the mechanical rhythm beneath your feet. You hum along quietly, feeling the layered textures of sound wrap around your consciousness. You glance toward the distant bank, barely visible through the thick fog. Shadows of trees rise and fall, cypress knees like dark fingers, gripping at the water's surface. Fringe stories whisper that shapes glimpsed in the mist were echoes of lost travelers or guardians of the river, silent witnesses to the passage of countless steamers. Historians still debate whether these tales were optical illusions, exaggerations, or grounded in genuine encounters, but the sense of unseen presence is soothing rather than alarming, a subtle reminder of the river's layered history. A soft, irregular splash ripples alongside the hull, and you catch sight of a fish briefly breaking the mirrored surface. Fringe accounts claim that such movements could signal hidden currents or warn of subtle hazards. Historians still argue whether these interpretations had any practical effect, but the sudden motion punctuates the gentle monotony, a soft reminder of the living ecosystem that surrounds and guides the vessel. You watch the ripple fade, letting your attention drift back to the hypnotic pulse of the paddle wheel in the thick, enveloping mist. The cabins along the midship deck begin to show faint signs of morning life. Curtains stir, the scent of tea or coffee drifts outward, and passengers move with quiet, deliberate motions. Fringe stories suggest that the early morning rituals of the passengers, arranging belongings, brewing drinks, or opening shutters, could carry symbolic weight, inviting calm and safe passage. Historians still debate the prevalence of such beliefs, but the mixture of sensory cues, the aroma, motion, and sound, creates a calming, almost meditative atmosphere. You walk slowly, letting each detail settle gently in your mind. You pause near a lantern post, watching the dim flame flicker against the fog. Fringe accounts suggest that such light could serve as a subtle communication with spirits or the river itself. Historians still argue whether these interpretations were widespread or anecdotal, but the interplay of light and mist transforms ordinary deck fixtures into small, luminous mysteries. You inhale slowly, feeling the hypnotic dance of illumination and shadow, the gentle sway of the deck, and the rhythmic heartbeat of the paddle wheel below. The world narrows to a soft, sensory focus that is both calming and captivating. You lean lightly on a stack of barrels, noticing the faint texture of rough rope and the polished smoothness of the wood. Fringe tales whisper that touch could act as a small, protective ritual, acknowledging the river and the boat's enduring spirit. Historians still debate whether these tactile rituals were deliberate or coincidental, but the combination of texture, scent, motion, and sound creates a meditative grounding. Each sensation reinforces your presence in the scene, allowing the mind to slow, drifting gently in sync with the steamer's soft, undulating movement. The paddle wheel churns on relentlessly, fog curling around the edges of the deck like silent waves. Fringe stories claim that certain stretches of the river held more potent spiritual energy, influencing the behaviors of crew and passengers alike. Historians still argue about the validity of these interpretations, but the sensory immersion, the mist, the pulse of the wheel, the faint smells of coal and timber, engages your attention fully, a gentle hypnosis shaped by movement, ritual, and imagination. You feel the river's quiet insistence, urging contemplation and slow, deliberate presence. Finally, you pause at the midship railing, letting the gentle rocking, muted fog and steady churn of the paddle wheel sink deep into your awareness. Fringe accounts suggest that moments like these, a pause amid motion and mist, were considered ideal for reflection or attuning oneself to the river's rhythm. Historians still debate whether this was a formal practice or a byproduct of long journeys, but for you it's enough to feel the calm, hypnotic embrace of history, fog, and water, each layer interwoven into the slow, soothing heartbeat of the Mississippi. You drift toward the aft deck, letting the mist curl lazily around your shoulders, clinging to your coat and hair. The soundscape changes subtly. The paddle wheel's constant churn, the soft hiss of the engine room, and the gentle slap of water against the hull create a layered rhythm that fills the senses. Fringe tales whisper that the aft deck was a favored spot for spirits to linger, a quiet vantage point where the river's unseen guardians observe passage. Historians still debate whether such beliefs were widespread or purely anecdotal, but the sense of unseen companionship adds a soft, thrilling tension, a gentle shiver beneath the calm of morning fog. A low, rolling swell rocks the boat as you step closer to the rail, your hand brushing the damp wood. You notice tiny droplets clinging to the surface, refracting the muted light from nearby lanterns. Fringe accounts claim that droplets on railings sometimes carried messages, subtle signals from spirits or previous travelers. Historians still argue whether this was literal or symbolic, but the sensory detail draws you deeper into the rhythm of the river, a quiet meditation on motion, moisture, and mist. The aft deck is quieter, less traffic than the bow or midship, and you appreciate the relative stillness. Fringe stories suggest that passengers often use this space for reflection, writing letters, or leaving small tokens for unseen companions. Historians still debate the prevalence of such practices, but the solitude combined with the thick fog curling around wooden posts creates a gentle sense of sanctuary. You lean lightly on the railing, listening to the soft chorus of distant birds, paddle wheel, and river, letting each element weave into a hypnotic lullaby. You notice a coil of rope glinting faintly in the lantern light, frayed in places yet carefully maintained. Fringe tales suggest that rope care was more than practical. Arranging coils in precise patterns could invite good luck or maintain harmony aboard. Historians still debate the ritualistic versus practical nature of this attention, but observing the deliberate handling, you feel the quiet choreography of life on the river, a seamless dance of labor, superstition, and care. A faint rustle comes from a nearby crate, and your imagination conjures fringe tales, Perhaps a hidden animal, a secret package, or a long-forgotten charm tucked away to guide or protect travelers. Historians still argue whether such stories are based in truth or the embellishments of later storytellers. But the combination of movement, sound, and fog makes the world feel alive, layered with mystery and gentle intrigue. You take a slow breath, letting the mist mingle with the sense of timber, coal, and river water, grounding your senses in the present moment. The gentle sway of the steamer accentuates each step as you move along the deck. Lanterns flicker in the fog, casting elongated shadows across planks and barrels, turning ordinary objects into spectral forms. Fringe stories claim that fleeting shapes in lantern light sometimes signaled messages from spirits or echoed past voyages. Historians still debate the validity of such interpretations, but the interplay of light and shadow adds a hypnotic texture, a visual lullaby that pulls you into a state of calm, reflective observation. A deckhand passes, adjusting a rope ladder with measured, careful movements. Fringe tales suggest that these small, precise gestures were observed by unseen guardians, ensuring the boat's smooth passage. Historians still argue whether this was actual belief or later storytelling embellishment, but the rhythm of repeated human motion, paired with the low hum of paddle wheel and distant splash of water, creates a meditative pattern. You watch, feeling the subtle choreography blend with fog, light, and the river's soft pulse. You pause near the stern lantern, noticing how the flickering flame dances in the mist, creating shifting shapes on the wet deck. Fringe accounts suggest that light and fog were sometimes read as omens, signaling changes in weather, river conditions, or even passenger fortunes. Historians still debate how seriously these interpretations were taken, but the visual effect is undeniably mesmerizing, a soft, layered interplay of illumination, shadow, and imagination. You let your gaze linger, tracing the ephemeral shapes as they ripple across wood and water. The muffled sound of conversation drifts from the cabins below deck, mingling with the steady thrum of the paddle wheel. Fringe stories whisper that echoes of past dialogue sometimes lingered in cabins, subtle remnants of memory that attentive travelers could perceive. Historians still argue whether such phenomena were real or folkloric embellishments, but for you the effect is gentle and calming, a quiet undercurrent of human presence layered into the sensory tapestry of the riverboat. A gentle mist swirls around your ankles as you step toward a barrel stacked near the rail. Fringe accounts claim that mist pooling around objects could be a protective aura, keeping travelers safe from minor mishaps or unseen spirits. Historians still debate whether this idea influenced behavior or was purely anecdotal, but the tactile sensation of damp wood, the sound of water, and the rhythmic vibration of the hull combine to create a soothing, immersive experience. Each sense pulls you deeper into the hypnotic embrace of the river. You notice faint markings on a crate, perhaps a letter or symbol etched long ago. Fringe tales suggest that such markings could convey messages between passengers or serve as charms for protection. Historians still argue about their significance or even authenticity, but the simple detail enriches your sense of connectedness with those who traveled here before. The mist drifts through your hair, and the low, steady pulse of the paddle wheel resonates through the deck, blending history, mystery, and gentle rhythm into a seamless experience. A soft splash to starboard catches your attention. A fish breaking the water briefly, leaving ripples that slowly fade. Fringe accounts claim that ripples could carry omens or messages, subtle hints read by attentive travelers. Historians still debate whether these interpretations were widely used or merely anecdotal, but the quiet interaction between living river, mist, and boat adds another layer of gentle intrigue. You watch the undulating surface, letting your mind drift with a slow, meditative pattern of motion and reflection. The deck itself seems to breathe with history, worn planks, polished railings, lantern posts, and coiled ropes, each telling quiet stories of passage and labor. Fringe stories maintain that touching these surfaces could carry blessings or maintain harmony aboard. Historians still debate the significance of such gestures, but for now, the texture of wood under your fingers and the rhythmic creak beneath your feet creates a subtle meditation, merging human, vessel, and river in gentle continuity. Finally, you lean lightly on the rail at the stern, feeling the damp mist on your cheeks and the steady pulse of the paddle wheel beneath. Fringe accounts suggest that these moments of stillness, paired with attentive observation of mist, movement, and light, help travelers attune to the river's rhythm and the subtle presence of unseen companions. Historians still debate whether this was deliberate or incidental, but the combined effect, the sensory layers, the fog, the quiet human activity, pulls you into a meditative trance. The Mississippi's slow, hypnotic current guiding your mind toward calm and reflection. You wander back toward the center of the deck, letting the gentle sway of the steamer rock you into a calm, measured rhythm. The mist curls in slow tendrils around posts, coiled ropes, and stacks of cargo, softening the edges of reality. Fringe tales whisper that midship was the ideal place to sense the river's heartbeat, a quiet point where unseen currents and guardians could be felt most keenly. Historians still debate whether these beliefs were widespread or merely anecdotal, but as you stand, the convergence of mist, motion, and muted sound creates a deep sense of immersion, a tactile meditation on the river's subtle guidance. Historians still debate the literal significance of these sounds, but the auditory layering adds a gentle, almost ceremonial texture to the environment, accentuating the hypnotic ambiance of gentle human labor in concert with the natural world. You hum softly in response, aligning with the subtle musicality of the morning. You step closer to a stack of barrels near the center of the deck, noting the faint marks and scratches along their sides. Fringe stories suggest that these small imperfections were sometimes interpreted as messages left by past travelers or guardians of the river. Historians still argue whether such interpretations were practical, ritualistic, or anecdotal, but the detail captures your attention, transforming mundane cargo into quiet storytelling artifacts, whispers of human presence preserved in wood and metal. The mist swirls upward, curling around lanterns, posts, and cargo, blending air, water, and light into a soft haze. Fringe accounts claim that fog itself could carry subtle energies, protective or cautionary, interpreted by those attuned to its presence. Historians still debate the significance of such beliefs, but the combined visual, auditory, and tactile cues, mist, paddle wheel, lanterns, and gentle sway, create a meditative immersion that draws your mind further into the river's slow, mesmerizing flow. Finally, you pause mid-deck, leaning lightly on the rail. The fog, the hum of the paddle wheel, the hiss of distant steam, and the soft glimmers of lantern light merge into a single, hypnotic rhythm. Fringe accounts suggest that moments like these, where one fully senses the environment, were considered ideal for quiet reflection and attunement with the river's subtle currents. Historians still debate whether this practice was formal or incidental, but you feel the gentle embrace of history, mist, and motion, letting each sensory layer settle deep into a calm, reflective trance. You move toward the forward cabins, the mist curling around your feet and brushing softly against your coat. The paddle wheel hums steadily, a rhythmic heartbeat that seems to anchor the boat to the river's invisible current. Fringe accounts whisper that the forward cabins were particularly sensitive to the river's subtle moods, where vibrations, sound, and mist converged in ways that heightened awareness of unseen presences. Historians still debate whether this was widely believed or mostly anecdotal, but for you, the convergence of scent, sound, and movement creates a trance-like immersion, the river's soft pulse echoing through the vessel and into your consciousness. The smell of damp wood mixes with faint traces of tobacco smoke and morning dew, subtle yet grounding. Fringe stories claim that these scents could act as quiet cues to attune one's senses to the river's energy. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were taken seriously by most travelers or were charming embellishments. But the sensory layering is hypnotic, a delicate interplay between past and present that slows your breathing and eases your mind. You inhale deeply, letting the aroma anchor your awareness in the gentle rhythm of life aboard the steamer. You glance at a faintly painted symbol on the cabin door, a small anchor intertwined with a faded swirl. Fringe accounts suggest that markings like these could serve as protective charms, guarding the vessel and its passengers against misfortune or ill spirits. Historians still debate whether such symbols were widely understood or largely personal superstition, but for now the faded paint becomes a quiet talisman, a subtle link between human hope and the river's eternal, shifting presence. The gentle rocking of the deck nudges your attention outward. You notice a few ducks paddling near the shoreline, their movements barely disturbing the mirrored surface of the water. Fringe tales claim that animals like these could act as guides or omens, signaling shifts in weather or river currents. Historians still argue about the seriousness of such interpretations, but the slow, deliberate movement of the ducks mirrors the paddle wheel's mechanical rhythm, reinforcing a sense of gentle, hypnotic continuity across the river and the boat itself. A deckhand passes by, adjusting a coil of rope near the cabin entrance. His movements are deliberate, almost ritualistic, and fringe tales suggest that coordinated labor on deck could align with the river's currents, maintaining a quiet harmony aboard. Historians still debate whether these practices were practical, symbolic, or purely anecdotal, but the choreography of human motion becomes part of the sensory landscape, a soft, meditative counterpoint to the paddle wheel's persistent thrum and the mist's soft embrace. You notice a faint ripple in the water alongside the hull, concentric circles slowly fading into the fog. Fringe accounts claim that subtle disturbances could carry messages, warnings, or blessings, interpreted only by those attuned to the river's pulse. Historians still debate the literal versus symbolic meaning of these phenomena, but the ripple is mesmerizing, a soft visual rhythm that complements the auditory heartbeat of paddle wheel, mist, and distant mechanical hiss. You trace its expansion with your eyes, letting your mind drift along with the motion. The lanterns along the forward deck sway slightly, casting faint, wavering shadows across the wood. Fringe stories suggest that shadow patterns could carry omens or subtle guidance for travelers. Historians still argue whether such interpretations were genuine or folkloric exaggerations, but the visual interplay of light and fog adds a hypnotic layer to the sensory environment, a soft, immersive rhythm that draws your attention inward. You follow the subtle dance of illumination, letting it guide a gentle focus through the morning haze. A faint creak from the deck boards accompanies your slow steps, a sound that blends seamlessly with the thrum of the paddle wheel and the soft lap of water. Fringe tales whisper that such noises could be interpreted as the vessel itself communicating or responding to the presence of humans. Historians still debate the significance of these interpretations, but the creak contributes to the overall sensory tapestry, reinforcing the hypnotic cadence of motion, sound, and subtle vibration across the hull. You let the layered details settle, each one deepening your immersion. You pause near a cabin window, peering through the mist to catch glimpses of the fog-wrapped riverbanks. Fringe accounts maintain that the river's edge could carry echoes of previous journeys or faint presences, a soft layering of memory on water and land. Historians still debate the authenticity of these observations, but the hazy silhouettes of trees, piers, and submerged logs create a visual rhythm, gentle and mesmerizing, enhancing the sense of continuity with travelers who came before. You breathe slowly, letting your mind trace the contours of mist, water, and memory. A small brass fitting on the deck glints faintly in the lantern light, drawing your attention. Fringe stories claim that reflective surfaces could attract protective spirits or act as subtle markers for attentive travelers. Historians still debate the practical significance of these tales, but the flash of metal in the mist becomes a quiet visual note, a punctuation in the sensory symphony of river, fog, paddle wheel, and human activity. You let your gaze linger, absorbing the interplay of light and shadow, movement and stillness. The forward cabins are silent now, save for distant murmurs from passengers below deck and the soft, steady hiss of steam from the engine room. Fringe accounts whisper that quiet attention in these moments could heighten awareness, a meditative attunement to the river's currents and unseen presences. Historians still argue whether this practice was deliberate or incidental, but you feel the calming effect, a gentle rhythm emerging from mist, motion, and quiet human presence. You notice the faint scent of damp linen and morning dew, a combination that feels soothing, grounding, and mildly nostalgic. Fringe tales suggest that sensory markers like these were interpreted as subtle blessings or reassurance for the voyage ahead. Historians still debate the prevalence of these beliefs, but the smell intertwines with mist, paddle wheel, and mechanical hum, a multi-layered meditation on sensation, history, and gentle human presence aboard the riverboat. A faint splash to port draws your attention. A small fish breaking the water, leaving ripples that expand slowly and fade into the fog. Fringe accounts claim that such ripples could signal hidden currents or subtle warnings, interpreted by the attuned eye. Historians still argue whether these interpretations were widely practiced or largely anecdotal, but the gentle movement complements the hypnotic rhythm of the paddle wheel and mist, reinforcing the layered, immersive experience of river travel. You watch the pattern expand, letting it sync with your breathing. Finally, you pause at the forward rail, leaning lightly as mist swirls around you. The paddle wheels thrum, the distant hiss of steam, flickering lanterns and layered scents converge, creating a hypnotic sensory environment. Fringe stories maintain that moments like these, spent in quiet observation, attuning to mist, motion, and light, allowed travelers to feel subtly connected to the river and its unseen companions. Historians still debate the validity and prevalence of these practices, but for now the effect is undeniable. You feel the gentle embrace of history, mist, and motion guiding your mind into calm reflection. You drift toward the open deck after the pilot house, letting the fog curl around your ankles as the boat rocks gently beneath you. The paddle wheel's steady churn hums through the hull, a rhythm both mechanical and strangely organic, syncing with the subtle slap of water against the sides. Fringe tales claim that this part of the deck held a special energy, where currents converged and the river's guardians were most attentive. Historians still debate whether such beliefs were widely held or mostly anecdotal, but the sensation of subtle motion, mist, and soft vibration is hypnotic, drawing your awareness deep into the river's quiet pulse. The scent of damp wood mixes with coal smoke, rising faintly from below deck. You inhale slowly, letting it settle into your senses. Fringe stories suggest that smells acted as markers for safe passage, tiny sensory rituals intended to attune travelers to the river's subtle moods. Historians still argue whether these interpretations were serious or simply charming folklore, but the layered sensory experience, smell, sound, vibration, and sight, creates a calm, meditative immersion into life aboard a Mississippi steamer. You glance at the deck fittings, polished brass gleaming faintly in lantern light, rails smooth from years of hands brushing over them. Fringe accounts claim that touching these surfaces could invite protection or good fortune. Small tactile rituals intertwine with the boat's machinery. Historians still debate whether such beliefs were prevalent or occasional anecdotes, but the sensation of worn metal beneath your fingers grounds you, a bridge connecting past travelers' hands to your own through time and history. A deckhand passes, adjusting a coil of rope with deliberate precision. Fringe stories whisper that these motions, repeated over countless journeys, were seen as a quiet choreography maintaining harmony with the river's currents. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic or practical, but the rhythm of his movements melds seamlessly with the paddle wheel's thrum and the faint hiss of steam, creating a hypnotic cadence that envelops the senses. You watch the fluid choreography, feeling a gentle meditation emerge from repetition, motion, and mist. You notice a faint ripple near the stern, spreading across the water in concentric circles. Fringe tales claim that these disturbances were interpreted as subtle messages or omens from the river. Historians still debate whether these interpretations were widely taken seriously or primarily anecdotal, but the ripple mirrors the paddle wheel's rhythm, layering visual and auditory cues into a meditative sensory pattern. You follow the circle's slow expansion, letting the motion synchronize with your breathing in the river's soft pulse. The lanterns along the aft deck flicker in the morning fog, casting long, wavering shadows across wet planks and coiled ropes. Fringe accounts suggest that these shadows could serve as subtle guides, echoing the movement of spirits or previous travelers. Historians still argue about the significance or accuracy of these beliefs, But the interplay of light and shadow transforms ordinary deck fixtures into gently hypnotic visual patterns, drawing your attention and focus in a slow, reflective rhythm. You lean lightly on the rail, letting the mist curl around your fingers. Fringe tails suggest that tactile contact with deck and railing reinforced a sense of protection and awareness, connecting the traveler to both vessel and river. Historians still debate whether such practices were widespread or individual superstition, but the sensation, the combination of touch, motion, mist, and sound, creates a deeply immersive experience. Your hand lingers on the cool wood, a slow tactile meditation, syncing with the boat's gentle sway. A faint whistle drifts from the engine room, blending with the steady thrum of the paddle wheel and the soft slap of water against the hull. Fringe stories whisper that such sounds carried subtle messages to river spirits or alerted crew to the presence of unseen observers. Historians still debate the practical versus symbolic use of these whistles, but for now, the auditory layering enriches the hypnotic environment. You hum quietly along with the whistle, merging human and mechanical rhythms into a single meditative flow. The mist thickens, wrapping around lanterns and posts, softening edges and blurring familiar forms. Fringe accounts claim that fog itself could carry protective energies or subtle omens, particularly in sensitive spots on deck. Historians still argue whether this belief had widespread influence, but the visual and tactile environment becomes a meditative tableau, the blurred shapes and muted light encouraging calm, reflective attention. You let the fog's embrace draw your senses inward, attuning to motion, rhythm, and texture. A small heron perches briefly on a submerged piling, wings folded, watching your passage with quiet patience. Fringe tales suggest that birds could act as guides or messengers, subtle watchers of the river and those aboard. Historians still debate the seriousness of these interpretations, but the bird's stillness complements the hypnotic rhythm of the paddle wheel and mist, a quiet visual counterpoint to the layered sounds and tactile sensations surrounding you. You linger in observation, absorbing the slow, meditative flow. You notice the gentle sway of the deck accentuates every sound. The soft creak of planks, the hum of the engine, the ripple of water, the low whisper of fog through posts. Fringe stories claim that these amplified subtleties heightened awareness of unseen presences. Historians still argue about the veracity and prevalence of such beliefs, but the overall sensory layering creates a trance-like immersion. Each small sound becomes a soft note in the river's symphony, inviting gentle attention and calm. A coil of rope glints faintly in the lantern light, highlighting its worn texture and careful arrangement. Fringe accounts claim that arranging ropes in particular patterns was a subtle ritual to maintain harmony or good fortune aboard. Historians still debate whether these practices were practical or symbolic, but the tactile, visual, and spatial details of deck life blend into a slow, mesmerizing meditation, reinforcing your awareness of rhythm, motion, and human continuity on the river. You pause near the aft rail, inhaling the mixture of mist, coal smoke, and morning dew. Fringe tales suggest that such moments of stillness, attuned to the layered sensory environment, allowed travelers to feel subtly connected to the river and its unseen watchers. Historians still debate whether this attunement was intentional or incidental, but the convergence of touch, smell, sound, and motion creates a deeply immersive, meditative state, easing attention and thought into calm contemplation. Finally, you lean against the railing, letting the deck's gentle sway, the mist, and the rhythmic thrum of the paddle wheel settle deep into your awareness. Fringe accounts suggest that moments like these, when all sensory layers align, offered a quiet communion with both vessel and river. Historians still argue whether this was deliberate or anecdotal, but the combined effect, the mist, motion, scent, sound, and shadow, pulls you into a reflective trance, the Mississippi's slow, hypnotic pulse guiding your mind toward calm and quiet awareness. You move toward the starboard side, letting the mist curl around your ankles and brush softly against your coat. The gentle rocking of the steamer keeps time with the paddle wheel's relentless thrum, a hypnotic rhythm that threads through every part of the deck. Fringe stories whisper that This side of the boat was particularly sensitive to subtle river energies, where currents and unseen presences were most keenly felt. Historians still debate whether such beliefs were widespread or simply anecdotal, but the sensation of motion, mist, and sound creates a deep reflective immersion, grounding you in the river's slow, persistent heartbeat. A deckhand passes by, adjusting a coil of rope with measured precision. Fringe tales suggest that repeated, deliberate motions like this maintained harmony aboard and even courted favor with unseen guardians. Historians still argue whether these rituals were symbolic, practical, or merely charming embellishments. But observing the choreography, the rhythm of hands, rope, and deck, feels meditative, a soft layer of human continuity woven into the fog and motion. You follow the motion with your eyes, letting the repetition lull your mind into calm awareness. You pause to watch a faint ripple expand along the water's surface, concentric circles slowly fading into the mist. Fringe accounts claim that such ripples were subtle messages, omens, or guidance from river spirits. Historians still debate whether these interpretations were ever seriously applied or mostly anecdotal, but the movement mirrors the paddle wheel's rhythm, layering visual and auditory cues into a soft, meditative pattern. You trace the ripple's progression with your gaze, letting the motion synchronize with your breathing and the river's gentle pulse. Lantern light flickers along the rail, casting long, wavering shadows across coiled rope, stacked barrels, and the smooth, wet deck. Fringe stories suggest that these shifting shadows were sometimes read as subtle signals or omens, a quiet interplay of light, shape, and imagination. Historians still argue whether such interpretations were meaningful or folkloric, but the visual patterns are hypnotic, drawing your attention into a slow, reflective meditation on shadow, motion, and history. You let the shapes dance across your peripheral vision, accentuating the misty tableau around you. The paddle wheel's mechanical thrum resonates beneath your feet, mingling with the soft slap of water and the faint hiss of the engine. Fringe tales claim that attentive travelers could listen to these vibrations for hidden cues or subtle guidance. Historians still debate the practicality of this belief, but the layered rhythm of sound, mist, and motion is undeniably calming. You sync your breathing to the pulse, letting the hypnotic cadence slow your thoughts, each exhale carrying you further into quiet reflection. You lean lightly on the starboard railing, letting your fingers trace the smooth brass and worn wood. Fringe accounts suggest that tactile contact with deck surfaces could invite protection or attune the traveler to the river's subtle energies. Historians still debate how widespread such practices were, but the sensation of touch grounds you in the present, connecting the physical boat to the layered histories of travelers who have stood in this very spot before. The combination of mist, sway, and tactile sensation forms a meditative triad that anchors your senses. A faint whistle rises from below deck, blending with the thrum of the paddle wheel and the soft ripple of water. Fringe stories claim that whistles could carry messages or blessings, communicating with spirits or guiding attentive travelers. Historians still argue whether such practices were taken seriously or were largely anecdotal, but the sound enriches the sensory environment, a delicate auditory layer woven into the river's hypnotic fabric. You hum along quietly, letting your body and mind align with the auditory rhythm. The mist thickens, curling around lanterns, posts, and stacked cargo, softening visual edges and blending sounds. Fringe tales suggest that fog itself could carry protective or cautionary energy, a silent layer of the river's presence. Historians still debate the significance of these beliefs, but the sensory immersion, touch, motion, sound, and shadow, is meditative, drawing your attention inward while keeping you gently aware of the river's persistent presence. You let the fog's quiet embrace envelop your senses. You notice a lone heron hovering briefly along the bank, wings folded, watching your progress with quiet patience. Fringe accounts claim that birds acted as subtle guides or messengers for river travelers. Historians still debate how seriously such interpretations were taken, but the heron's stillness mirrors the paddle wheel's rhythm, a visual counterpoint to the auditory and tactile layering of your environment. You pause, letting the bird's patience settle into your own mental pace, reinforcing the meditative rhythm of river, mist, and vessel. A faint splash rises near the hull, a fish breaking the water, leaving gentle ripples in its wake. Fringe stories suggest that these ripples carried subtle messages or guidance, read only by attentive travelers. Historians still argue whether these interpretations were widespread or largely anecdotal, but the quiet interaction between water, motion, and mist reinforces the layered rhythm that has become your meditation. You follow the expanding circles, letting the river's soft pulse synchronize with your own breath. The deck boards creak gently beneath your feet as you step forward, the sound blending with the thrum of the paddle wheel and the low hiss of the engine. Fringe accounts maintain that such auditory details heightened awareness, a meditative attunement to the environment. Historians still debate the significance or prevalence of this belief, but the overall effect is hypnotic. Sound, mist, motion, and tactile sensation merging into a unified, calming rhythm. You step slowly, letting each creak, hum, and splash anchor your attention. You pause near a brass fitting, glinting faintly in lantern light. Fringe tales claim that reflective surfaces could attract protective energies or signal the presence of unseen companions. Historians still debate the literal significance of such observations, but the effect is mesmerizing, a small visual counterpoint to the layered sensory environment. You linger, letting light, shadow, and reflection weave into your meditation on motion, mist, and history. The aft starboard deck seems to breathe with past activity. Worn rails, polished brass, coiled ropes, and faint marks in planks. Fringe accounts suggest that interacting with these surfaces could foster attunement with the vessel and river. Historians still argue whether this was a common practice or isolated anecdotes. But for you, the textures, sounds, and rhythms merge into a meditative experience. Each tactile and auditory note reinforces the slow, reflective immersion of the river voyage. Finally, you lean against the rail, feeling the steady sway, thick mist, and paddle wheel's heartbeat coalesce around you. Fringe stories maintain that moments like this, spent fully attuned to environment, allowed travelers to sense subtle energies and historical echoes in the river. Historians still debate the prevalence and seriousness of such attunement, but the combination of tactile, visual, and auditory elements draws you into a calm, meditative trance. You exhale slowly, letting history, mist, and river merge into quiet contemplation. You make your way toward the small observation platform near the pilot house, the mist wrapping around your ankles and brushing lightly against your sleeves. The paddle wheel hums steadily, a low, rhythmic pulse that resonates through the deck and into your bones. Fringe tales claim that the pilot house vicinity was a particularly potent spot for sensing the river's unseen currents and guardians, where the convergence of water, fog, and motion amplified perception. Historians still debate whether such beliefs were widespread or merely colorful storytelling, but the immersive rhythm of the environment has a calming, hypnotic effect, anchoring your attention to the slow, steady heartbeat of the Mississippi. The scent of damp timber mingles with coal smoke, rising faintly from the engine room below. Fringe accounts suggest that these olfactory cues were considered markers of the river's mood or subtle guidance. Historians still argue whether these interpretations were genuinely functional or largely anecdotal, but the multi-layered sensory experience, sound, motion, mist, and smell, creates a deeply meditative atmosphere. You inhale slowly, letting the mixture settle into your awareness, a gentle reminder of the river's presence surrounding the vessel. You pause near a polished brass fitting, its surface smooth from countless hands brushing against it over years of travel. Fringe stories claim that touching these surfaces could invite protective energy or good fortune. Historians still debate how widespread or serious such practices were, but for now, Your hand lingers on the cool metal, connecting you to the history embedded in every deck plank, rail, and rope coil. The tactile sensation complements the hypnotic blend of sound and motion, drawing you deeper into a reflective state. A deckhand adjusts a rope coil nearby, his movements deliberate and rhythmic. Fringe accounts maintain that such coordinated labor harmonized human action with the river's flow, a subtle ritual of continuity and balance. Historians still argue whether these gestures were symbolic, practical, or largely anecdotal, but observing the choreography in fog-draped light reinforces the meditative cadence established by the paddle wheel in the mist. You watch, letting the flow of motion lull your thoughts into calm reflection. The faint ripple of water alongside the hull catches your eye, expanding slowly before fading into the morning fog. Fringe tales suggest that ripples could carry messages or omens, visible only to those attuned to subtle patterns. Historians still debate whether such interpretations were seriously applied or mostly folkloric, but the visual rhythm mirrors the paddle wheel's persistent thrum, layering the senses into a hypnotic, meditative loop. You let your eyes follow the ripple's expansion, synchronizing breath and attention with the river's soft pulse. Lanterns along the observation platform flicker gently, casting shadows across wet deck boards, coiled ropes, and polished brass. Fringe stories suggest that such shifting shadows could subtly signal hidden presences or energies aboard the vessel. Historians still debate whether these interpretations were meaningful or anecdotal, but the interplay of light, shadow, and fog creates a mesmerizing visual pattern, guiding your attention inward. You follow the shadow's slow dance, feeling a subtle rhythm of mystery and calm. You lean lightly on the railing, mist curling around your fingers and brushing your cheeks. Fringe accounts claim that tactile contact with deck surfaces enhanced awareness of the river's unseen guardians or energies. Historians still debate the prevalence of these beliefs, but the sensation anchors you firmly in the moment, connecting touch, motion, and ambient rhythm into a meditative tableau. Each detail, brass, wood, mist, vibration, blends seamlessly into the hypnotic experience of river travel. A soft whistle echoes faintly from below deck, merging with the paddle wheel's hum and the distant lap of water. Fringe stories claim that these sounds carried messages or blessings to attentive travelers, a subtle auditory guide along the river. Historians still argue about their significance, whether practical or symbolic, but the combined layers of sound, motion, and mist create a trance-like focus. You hum quietly in response, letting the rhythm align your breathing and awareness with the boat's gentle pulse. The mist thickens around the pilot house, softening edges and blending visual cues into an indistinct, dreamlike tableau. Fringe accounts suggest that fog carried subtle energies, protective or cautionary, experienced only by those attentive to its presence. Historians still debate whether such beliefs influence behavior widely, but the visual and tactile ambiance reinforces a meditative focus, drawing your attention to the convergence of motion, shadow, and sensory layering. You let the fog wrap around your awareness, heightening calm and reflection. A lone heron glides silently near the riverbank, wings folded, seemingly observing your passage. Fringe tales suggest that birds acted as guides or omens, subtle messengers between the natural world and human travelers. Historians still argue how seriously these interpretations were taken, but the heron's serene presence mirrors the paddle wheel's steady rhythm, adding a gentle visual layer to the auditory and tactile immersion. You pause, letting the bird's quiet grace settle into your own mental pace. A small splash interrupts the surface of the water near the hull, concentric ripples radiating outward and fading slowly. Fringe stories claim that such minor disturbances carried subtle guidance or warnings. Historians still debate whether these interpretations were meaningful or anecdotal, but the ripple complements the hypnotic cadence of paddle wheel, mist, and subtle motion, reinforcing your reflective trance. You follow the expanding circles, letting the river's pulse synchronize with your breath. The deck boards creak softly underfoot, harmonizing with the hum of the paddle wheel and the hiss of the steam engine. Fringe accounts claim that such subtle sounds heightened awareness, a meditative attunement to the environment. Historians still argue about the prevalence or seriousness of this belief, but the auditory layering deepens immersion, each creak, hum, and whisper of mist blending into a slow, rhythmic meditation. You step carefully, letting each sound anchor your presence. You pause near a brass fitting, catching the lantern's glow, its surface smooth and inviting. Fringe stories suggest that reflective surfaces could attract protective energies or subtle messages from unseen companions. Historians still debate the practical or symbolic significance of this, but the visual detail adds a delicate punctuation to the sensory layering. You linger, letting reflection, shadow, mist, and motion merge into a calming rhythm. Finally, you lean against the railing, letting the mist, the paddle wheels thrum, and the faint hiss of steam converge around you. Fringe accounts suggest that moments like these, fully attuned to movement, light, sound, and mist, allowed travelers to sense subtle energies and echoes of history. Historians still argue about the prevalence and validity of these practices, but for you, the combination of sensory layers draws mind and body into a deep, reflective calm, the Mississippi's slow pulse guiding awareness and quiet thought. You step lightly onto the open aft deck, the mist curling around your ankles and brushing your sleeves as the steamer rocks gently beneath you. The paddle wheel's low, persistent thrum resonates through the deck boards, mingling with the soft slap of water against the hull. Fringe accounts claim that the aft deck was particularly attuned to the river's subtle energies, where currents converged and guardians lingered unseen. Historians still debate whether these beliefs were widespread or mainly anecdotal, but the convergence of motion, mist, sound, and scent creates a hypnotic, immersive rhythm, pulling your awareness gently into the river's slow, meditative pulse. The smell of damp wood and faint coal smoke rises from below deck, mingling with morning dew and the distant aroma of dried herbs from cargo crates. Fringe stories suggest that these scents were used as subtle markers, helping travelers sense shifts in weather, river currents, or unseen presence. Historians still argue whether such interpretations were taken seriously or remained anecdotal, but the combination of layered smells, soft motion, and muted light deepens your immersion, anchoring the senses in a calming rhythm. You pause near a polished brass fitting along the railing, running your fingers across its worn surface. Fringe tales claim that touching these objects could invite protection, good fortune, or attunement with the river's energies. Historians still debate the prevalence or seriousness of this practice, but the tactile sensation connects you to the countless hands that have passed here before, grounding your presence in history, mist, and movement. Each subtle texture, each curve and groove becomes a note in the meditative symphony of the boat. A deckhand moves quietly nearby, adjusting a coil of rope with deliberate care. Fringe accounts maintain that coordinated labor, performed rhythmically, could harmonize the human presence with the river's flow, fostering subtle continuity and calm aboard. Historians still debate whether these gestures were symbolic or practical, but the movement blends seamlessly into the paddle wheel's thrum and the mist's soft embrace, a hypnotic choreography of human action, mechanical rhythm, and natural elements. You watch, letting each motion slow your thoughts and settle your awareness. Faint ripples pass along the hull, expanding gently before fading into fog-wrapped water. Fringe tales suggest that these disturbances could carry subtle omens or guidance, read only by attentive travelers. Historians still argue whether such interpretations were widely used or mostly anecdotal, but the visual rhythm complements the steady auditory pulse of the paddle wheel, the soft hiss of steam, and the sway of the deck. You follow the movement, letting the circles synchronize with your breathing and mental pace. Lanterns flicker softly along the railing, casting shadows that stretch and bend across wet planks, coiled ropes, and polished brass fittings. Fringe stories claim that these shifting patterns of light and shadow could signal hidden presences or subtle guidance for travelers. Historians still debate the significance or accuracy of these interpretations, but the dance of illumination creates a mesmerizing visual rhythm that enhances your meditative focus. You let your eyes drift with the flickering shadows, each sway deepening the hypnotic calm. You lean lightly against the railing, mist curling around your fingers and brushing your cheeks. Fringe accounts suggest that tactile engagement with deck surfaces enhanced awareness, a subtle attunement with the vessel and river. Historians still argue about the prevalence of this practice, but for now the sensation, wood under your fingers, cool brass, the gentle rocking of the deck, grounds you fully in the hypnotic, multi-sensory environment. Each detail weaves together into a slow, reflective immersion. A faint whistle rises from below deck, blending seamlessly with the paddle wheel's thrum and the soft, rhythmic splash of water. Fringe tales maintain that these sounds could carry messages or blessings to observant travelers, connecting human activity to unseen presences. Historians still debate the significance of these signals, whether practical or symbolic, but the auditory layering adds depth to the meditative atmosphere. You hum quietly in response, aligning your awareness with the rhythm of sound, mist, and motion. The fog thickens, curling around lanterns, posts, and stacked cargo. Fringe accounts claim that mist carried subtle energies or guidance, perceivable only to those attentive to its presence. Historians still argue about the validity or prevalence of these beliefs, but the visual and tactile elements create a layered sensory immersion, allowing mind and body to settle into reflective stillness. You let the fog's gentle embrace envelop you, heightening the meditative state fostered by rhythm, light, and texture. A heron glides silently along the riverbank, pausing briefly before continuing its slow patrol. Fringe stories claim birds acted as subtle guides or omens, watching travelers with quiet patience. Historians still debate how seriously such interpretations were taken, but the heron's calm, deliberate motion mirrors the paddle wheel's rhythmic pulse, a gentle visual complement to auditory and tactile immersion. You pause, letting the bird's quiet presence settle into your own mental tempo. A faint splash rises near the hull, ripples radiating outward slowly before fading into fog. Fringe accounts suggest these minor disturbances carried subtle messages or guidance for those who observed carefully. Historians still debate the seriousness or prevalence of these interpretations, but the movement aligns with the hypnotic pulse of paddle wheel, mist and sway, reinforcing your reflective trance. You trace the expanding circles, letting them synchronize with your breath and calm your thoughts. The deck boards creak softly underfoot, harmonizing with the low hum of machinery and distant splash of water. Fringe stories maintain that these subtle sounds heightened awareness and focus, fostering meditative attunement to the vessel and river. Historians still argue the prevalence of such beliefs, but each creak and hum blends seamlessly into the sensory landscape, reinforcing a hypnotic, reflective rhythm. You step slowly, savoring the layered auditory immersion. You pause near a brass fitting, catching the lantern's glint. Fringe tales suggest that reflective surfaces could invite protective energies or signal subtle messages from unseen companions. Historians still debate the practical versus symbolic significance, but the visual effect adds a delicate punctuation to the sensory environment. You linger, letting shadow, reflection, mist and motion converge into a slow, calming rhythm. Finally, you lean against the aft railing, mist curling around your face, the paddle wheel's heartbeat beneath your feet, and the low hiss of steam melding with the gentle slap of water. Fringe accounts maintain that moments like this, when fully attuned to environment, allowed travelers to sense the river's subtle currents and historical echoes. Historians still debate the prevalence and meaning of this attunement, but the combined layers of sensory input, tactile, visual, auditory, olfactory, draw you into a deep reflective calm. You exhale slowly, letting history, mist, and river merge into a soothing, meditative trance.